Some people go missing in war. Some bodies are never found. But this soldier did something no one could explain. He came back 30 years later, and the world he returned to didn't remember he ever existed. The year was 1971, a time when the world was cracking under the weight of conflict. Soldiers moved like shadows, carrying secrets heavier than their weapons. Among them was a man known only by his code, Echo 7, a quiet, disciplined reconnaissance scout, trusted for missions where survival was never guaranteed. On the morning he disappeared, Echo 7 was assigned to survey a dense, uncharted forest the locals called the corridor that breathes. They spoke of strange winds, sudden temperature drops, and nights where even animals refused to enter. Soldiers laughed at these stories until Echo 7 walked in. His final radio message came at 14:43 hours. Visibility fading, airfields different, continuing forward. Then came a burst of static, and silence so deep it felt intentional. The search teams moved in immediately. They found Echo 7's footprints clean, sharp, heading straight into the forest. But after 30 meters, the prints simply stopped, not faded, not disturbed, stopped, as if he had stepped off the world. No blood, no weapon, no torn fabric, not even signs of struggle, just a cold metallic smell in the air. Reported by 2 soldiers, a detail that later vanished from the official files. That night, a villager claimed he saw a thin white beam rising from the forest, like the ground was sending something back to the sky. Investigators marked the statement as stress-induced imagination. After 48 hours, the search was closed. Echo 7 was declared killed in action. But inside the classified file, a hidden handwritten note was found. Subject not confirmed dead. Terrain anomaly likely. Recommends silence. 3 months later, the officer who wrote that note died under unexplained circumstances. Echo 7's story was buried. But it was far from over. 30 years passed. Wars ended. Borders changed. Entire generations were born and buried. Echo 7's name, once whispered in search briefings, faded into dust. To the world, he had never existed. But on a silent evening in 2001, the impossible happened. A man appeared on the old village road barefoot, limping, covered in mud and torn military fabric so aged it looked like it belonged in a museum. His uniform was the exact pattern discontinued 3 decades earlier. His dog tags were rusted nearly beyond recognition. His hair was long, his face hollow, his eyes sunken, but strangely alert, as if he had been awake for years. He walked straight to the village market, collapsing near an old tea stall. When people approached, he whispered with a trembling voice, "Where's my unit? Why is everything different?" An elderly shopkeeper stared at him for a long, frozen moment. Then, with a shaking hand, he touched the soldier's face. No, this can't be. You died. We buried your memory decades ago." Doctors were called. Police followed. The man kept insisting the same thing. "I didn't disappear. I was still on my mission." It was morning, 1971, just a day. His watch, an old military issue piece, was stuck at 2:43 p.m., the exact time his final radio call was recorded. His boots contained soil that geologists later stated did not match the region's modern composition. That detail, too, vanished from official paperwork within 24 hours. When questioned about where he had been, Echo 7's answer remained the same. "I only walked through the forest. Just one night." Why has everything changed? But the strangest part was not what he said. It was how he looked. He had aged almost nothing. The morning after his return, Echo 7 was taken to the nearby district headquarters for identity verification. The officers expected confusion, maybe trauma, but they were not prepared for what came next. Every record with his name, military, medical, residential, came back with the same response. No such person exists. His service number deleted. His training batch removed from archives. His assigned unit officially never formed. It was as if someone had gone through the past with a scalpel and cut him clean out of history. Still insisting he was sane, Echo 7 demanded to be taken to his home, a small brick house on the northern hill, where his wife and young son once lived. They drove him there, but the house was gone. A modern family home stood in its place. When Echo 7 walked toward the gate, the owners stepped out. frightened by the disoriented stranger in an ancient uniform. He pointed to where a small garden once grew. My boy planted a tree here. He used to wait for me on that step. There was no step, no garden, no tree. The family swore no soldier had ever lived there. Echo 7 fell to his knees, shaking. My wife, where is she? The police reluctantly checked older civic records. They found something buried in a dusty, unscanned ledger. His wife had died 20 years earlier. His son had left the country shortly after. His parents had passed long before that. Standing in the graveyard, staring at the stone with his wife's name, Echo 7 whispered, "But I left them this morning, today. How can 30 years pass in one night?" The investigating officer later wrote, "He was not grieving a loss. He was grieving a stolen reality." Echo 7 moved through the village slowly, each step heavier than the last. He didn't recognize the roads, the shops, the unfamiliar street lamps humming overhead, but his body remembered the path home. Muscle memory guided him where memory could not. When he reached the small stone house at the end of the lane, the place he had built with his own hands, he stopped. The windows were different, the paint was new, but the foundation, yes, that was his. He could feel it. He knocked. A woman in her late 50s opened the door. She stared at him with confusion, then fear, then something worse, recognition trying to surface and drowning before it could breathe. "Can I help you?" she whispered. Echo 7 swallowed hard. "This is my home." The woman flinched. "No, this belonged to a soldier. He disappeared decades ago." Echo 7's voice cracked. "That soldier is me." The woman stared into his eyes, searching them like pages in a book she didn't want to read. Finally, she whispered the truth. "My mother used to tell me stories about him. She said he was the kindest man she ever knew, and that she loved him more than anyone. But after he never returned, she remarried. She moved on." The woman hesitated. "She died 10 years ago." Something inside Echo 7 fractured quietly, like paper tearing in another room. He asked, voice trembling, "Did she leave anything behind? Anything of mine?" The woman nodded slowly and stepped inside. After a moment, she returned with a small metal box, rusted at the edges. It's all she kept. She said she could never throw it away, even when everyone told her to. Echo 7 held the box with shaking hands. Inside were 2 items: a photograph of him smiling young, alive, untouched by the forest, and a letter he never wrote, sealed in an envelope addressed to his wife. The date on the envelope read, December 3rd, 1992, 21 years after he disappeared. The envelope felt wrong in Echo 7's hands, warm, almost pulsing, as if it had its own heartbeat. He traced the date with a trembling finger, 1992, a year he should never have lived to see, a year he had no memory of. The woman watched him carefully. "My mother never opened it," she said. She said the letter terrified her. She believed it wasn't meant for her eyes. Echo 7 swallowed the rising panic and slid a finger under the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was unmistakably his, sharp, precise, controlled. The handwriting of a soldier, but the words were nothing he remembered writing. "If this reaches you, it means the corridor has chosen its path. Time is thinning here, breaking like old glass. I don't know which me is writing this, or which you will read it. But listen carefully, don't let them open the forest again. What lives inside isn't a threat, it's a decision, and it wants to finish what it started." Echo 7 felt his blood run cold. He flipped the page. On the back was a crude drawing, a map of the forest, marked with 3 X's forming a perfect triangle, and in the center, a circle with a single word, Breachpoint. The woman stepped closer, lowering her voice. "When my mother found that letter in our mailbox, there was no name, no stamp, no postal mark, just the envelope and your handwriting." Echo 7 stared at the map, at the impossible date, at the warning written by a version of himself he had never been. And then he noticed something. In the lower right corner of the letter, faint but visible under the light, a fingerprint, his own, aged, weathered, older than he was now. The room suddenly felt too small. Whatever happened to him in the forest wasn't done. Echo 7 left the house with the metal box clutched tightly to his chest. The village felt colder now, as if the air itself recoiled from him. Whispers followed him down the street. Some people recognized the uniform. Others simply sensed that something about this man was misplaced, out of sync. He didn't stop walking until the last house was behind him and the tree line of the forest loomed ahead. The corridor that breathes, the same place he vanished, the same place he had awakened without remembering how he survived. But now, standing before it again, Echo 7 sensed something he hadn't felt before. The forest remembered him. Wind moved through the branches in slow, rhythmic pulses, almost like inhaling and exhaling. The soil looked darker than it should, as if it had absorbed something over the years. And though it was the middle of the day, no light seemed to penetrate deeper than a few meters. He unfolded the strange map, the one written by his older self, and held it beside the trees. The first X on the map matched perfectly with a twisted, dead oak near the entrance. His heart pounded, not because the map was accurate, but because he suddenly remembered standing beside that exact tree before, just not in this lifetime. A flash so quick he questioned it showed him kneeling on that soil, carving something with a knife that looked too advanced for 1971. A metallic hum, a white pulse of light. Then the memory vanished. Echo 7 forced himself to breathe. He stepped into the forest. The air shifted instantly, warmer, thicker, almost aware. Branches above him creaked despite the stillness. A low vibration rolled through the ground, so subtle he felt it more in his bones than in his feet. And then he heard it. A voice, not spoken, not whispered. Remember. Echo 7 froze, because the voice wasn't coming from around him. It was coming from inside him. Echo 7 stood perfectly still, waiting, hoping the voice was nothing more than exhaustion clawing at his senses. But the forest didn't wait. Branches began to shift, not with wind, but with intention. Leaves rustled in patterns too precise to be natural, as if the forest were speaking in a language made of movement. The deeper he walked, the more he felt it, an unseen rhythm pulling at him, guiding him like invisible hands on his shoulders. He stopped at a narrow clearing where sunlight barely touched the ground. Something was wrong, very wrong. The soil was disturbed, not by animals, not by weather, but by footprints, rows of them, deep, perfectly formed, all identical, leading forward into the darkness, as if someone had walked the path again and again and again. Echo 7 crouched down. The shape of the boots, the spacing of the steps, the slight drag on the left heel. His breath caught. "They're mine," he whispered. Every print belonged to him. But there was something even stranger. Some footprints were old, edges softened, soil settled. Others looked fresh, as if made just minutes earlier. And a few overlapped each other in unnatural ways, like time didn't know which version of his steps to follow. A sudden dizziness hit him. He saw himself walking through this clearing at different ages, younger, older, wounded, limping, sprinting, multiple versions of himself flickering like shadows that had slipped free of their bodies. He shut his eyes, but the vision only sharpened. One version, the oldest, with a gray beard and deep scars, turned and looked directly at him. Not at the forest, not at the memory, at him. The older Echo 7 raised a hand and pointed toward the second X on the map. Then his mouth moved, forming a silent warning. "Don't follow me." When Echo 7 opened his eyes, the clearing was empty. But the fresh footprints continued forward, waiting for him. The deeper Echo 7 moved into the corridor, the more the forest seemed to fold around him. Trees leaned inward, their branches knitting together like ribs closing around a beating heart. The air thickened to a damp, metallic taste, like old blood or the inside of a rusted machine. Up ahead, the ground sloped downward into a narrow ravine. The second X on the map, Echo 7 slid down carefully. When his boots touched the bottom, he immediately understood why this spot mattered. The earth was hot. Not warm hot. Warm enough that steam rose from fractures in the soil, each crack glowing with a faint blue shimmer. It was the same glow he remembered fleetingly from the flash inside the forest decades ago, the flash he once thought was death. Echo 7 knelt and pressed his palm an inch above a glowing crack. A vibration pulsed upward, not randomly rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. He jerked his hand back. From somewhere deep below, something answered that heartbeat. A second pulse, then a third, slower, larger. Something was waking up. He unfolded the letter again, staring at the word written in the center of the triangle on the map. Breachpoint. His older self wasn't warning him to avoid it. He was warning him not to let others reach it. Because whatever the breachpoint was, it didn't belong to this world alone. Echo 7 scanned the ravine and noticed something half buried in the soil. He brushed away dirt and revealed an object smooth, metallic, and shaped like a fragment of some machine. But the metal wasn't corroded. It wasn't even scratched. Instead, it seemed to hum gently at his touch. He recognized it instantly. He had seen this metal before. It was part of the device he remembered carving into the ground in that brief hallucination, a device far too advanced for any era he belonged to. A cold realization crept into his spine. He didn't find this device. He helped build it, and the forest was waiting for him to finish. The ravine trembled again, stronger this time, shedding pebbles down its walls. Echo 7 backed away from the glowing cracks as the heat intensified. Something beneath the earth was shifting, coiling, awakening like a creature stretching after a long sleep. Then he heard footsteps, slow, heavy, not human. Echo 7 spun around, raising his guard. At the top of the ravine, a silhouette stood against the dim light filtering through the trees. It was tall and its limbs were unnaturally straight, as though joints were optional. It stepped forward, and Echo 7's heart nearly stopped. The creature wasn't a creature at all. It was a man wearing his uniform, his insignia, his gear. But this version was older, taller, wrong in ways that made Echo 7's stomach twist. The face looked almost human. But the angles were too sharp, the skin too pale, the eyes too reflective. It was wearing his future, like a mask borrowed from a version of him that should never exist. "Identify yourself," Echo 7 shouted. The figure tilted its head slowly, mechanically, like it was studying him. Then it spoke with a layered voice, as if several versions of Echo 7 spoke at once. "You left the work unfinished." Echo 7 staggered back. "What work?" The figure stepped closer, the ground trembling with each movement. "The breachpoint must stabilize, or this reality fractures." Echo 7 clutched the metallic fragment he'd found. "You're lying." The figure paused, then raised a hand, and in its palm was the same metallic fragment, but whole, glowing brighter, complete. Echo 7 suddenly understood. This wasn't an enemy. It wasn't a copy. It was the version of him who had disappeared, the one who never returned. The Echo 7 who belonged to the forest, and he wasn't here to help. He was here to replace him. Echo 7 felt the forest close around him, breathing in slow, predatory rhythms. The older version, the forests. Echo 7 descended into the ravine with impossible grace, the earth humming beneath its feet. The air grew tight and electric, pulling Echo 7 toward the center of the triangle on the map. The breachpoint, the glowing cracks, flared brighter, forming a perfect circle around Echo 7's boots. The hum became a single, rising tone, like a machine powering up. The older Echo 7 held out the complete device. "Take it. Complete the loop." Echo 7 shook his head. "I'm not finishing whatever this is." The older version's face twisted, not angry, but disappointed. "You already did. You just don't remember it yet." The ground split open beneath them, revealing an abyss of blinding white light. Fragments of memory burst inside Echo 7's mind. Him building the device. Him sending the letter to his wife from a time that didn't exist. Him walking these same steps again and again. Different ages, different lives. The forest had been repeating him, trying him, using him. Echo 7 looked at the incomplete fragment in his hand, then at the completed device in the older version's palm. He realized the truth. If he took the completed device, the loop would seal. Reality would absorb him. The forest would win. If he didn't, the loop would break. But so would he. He made his choice. With a roar, Echo 7 hurled the incomplete fragment into the glowing breach. The ground screamed. Light tore upward. The older Echo 7 lunged, but too late. The loop shattered. The forest convulsed violently, trees bending, cracking, dissolving into white. Echo 7's body lifted into the air, weightless, burning, fading, and with his final breath, he whispered, "I choose my own ending." The light swallowed him. When the villagers visited the forest days later, they found nothing. No ravine, no cracks, no footprints, just an empty clearing, and a metal box lying perfectly centered in the grass, sealed, untouched, waiting.